The afternoon sun beat down on Interstate 15 as Pete Anderson guided his 18-wheeler through the Nevada desert. He'd been driving this route for nearly 15 years, hauling medical supplies from Las Vegas to hospitals in Southern California twice a week. The familiar stretch of highway felt like an old friend by now, every curve, rest stop, and roadside diner etched into his memory. Pete rolled down the window, letting the warm desert air rush through the cabin. His playlist of classic rock kept him company as the miles ticked by. He was making good time today, which meant he might get back home to see his daughter's softball game if traffic through San Bernardino wasn't too bad. About 40 miles outside of Barstow, Pete noticed a car pulled over on the shoulder. It wasn't uncommon to see vehicles stranded in this stretch. Cell reception was spotty, and the nearest service station was a good 20 miles away. As he drew closer, he could make out a man kneeling beside a sleek, older model Porsche, clearly dealing with a flat tire. Pete had passed plenty of stranded motorists over the years. Sometimes the schedule was too tight to stop. Other times, highway patrol was already on scene. But something about the lone figure made Pete ease off the accelerator. The man didn't look like he was calling for help, just quietly working on the tire with what appeared to be limited success. What the heck, Pete muttered to himself, flipping on his hazard lights and carefully pulling his massive rig onto the shoulder about 50 feet ahead of the Porsche. The midday heat hit him like a wall as he climbed down from the cab. Pete grabbed his worn baseball cap from the passenger seat and his small toolbox from behind the driver's seat. Years on the road had taught him to be prepared for just about anything. As Pete approached, he could see the stranded motorist more clearly now, a man in his late 50s with slightly longish dark hair, wearing jeans, a plain black t-shirt, and a well-worn brown jacket despite the heat. The man was examining the flat tire with a look of calm resignation. "Need a hand there?" Pete called out as he approached. The man looked up, squinting against the sun. For a split second, Pete thought he looked familiar, but the thought vanished as quickly as it had come. Out here in the desert, heat played tricks on your mind. "That would be amazing, thank you," the stranger said with genuine relief in his voice. "I was just about to call roadside assistance, but service is terrible out here." Pete nodded, setting down his toolbox. "Yeah, this stretch is notorious for dead zones. Been that way for years." He knelt down to examine the flat tire. "Looks like you caught a nasty piece of debris. Sidewall's torn pretty good." The stranger sighed. "Yeah, I heard it go about a mile back. Limped it over to this spot." "Smart move," Pete said, already digging through his toolbox. "You got a spare, I assume?" "In the trunk," the man replied, walking around to pop it open. As they worked together to get the car jacked up, Pete fell into easy conversation. It was a habit he'd developed over decades on the road. Talking made the work go faster. "Headed to Vegas or leaving it?" Pete asked, loosening the lug nuts on the damaged wheel. "Leaving," the man said with a small smile. "Just finished some work there. Heading back to Los Angeles." "Work, huh?" Pete glanced at the Porsche. It was a beautiful car, probably from the early 90s, well-maintained but not flashy. "Must be pretty good work." The man chuckled softly. "It has its moments." The car was a splurge from a while back. There was something humble about the way he said it that Pete appreciated. He'd met all types on the road. The show-offs, the complainers, the ones who looked down on a truck driver stopping to help. This guy seemed different. "I'm Pete, by the way," he said, extending a grease-smudged hand. "John," the man replied, shaking it firmly. Pete noticed calluses on his palm, not the hand of someone who sat behind a desk all day. "You know your way around cars, John?" Pete asked, as they worked together to lift off the flat tire. "A little," John admitted. "More motorcycles than cars, to be honest. But I know enough to get myself in trouble." Pete laughed. "That's usually how it goes. My dad was a mechanic, taught me everything I know. Comes in handy on these long hauls." As Pete mounted the spare tire, John asked about his trucking route. There was something genuine in the way he asked questions, not just making small talk, but actually listening to the answers. Pete found himself telling John about his 15 years on the road, the hospitals that counted on his deliveries, and even about his daughter Lisa's softball team back home in Riverside. "She's the pitcher," Pete said proudly, tightening the lug nuts. "Got a mean fastball for a 12-year-old, been trying to make it to more of her games this season." "That's great," John said, and Pete could tell he meant it. It's important to be there for those moments. The sincerity in his voice made Pete glance up. There was something in John's expression, a brief flicker of what might have been regret or longing, that made Pete wonder about the man's own story. But before he could ask, the spare tire was secured. "That should get you to the next town at least," Pete said, lowering the jack. "Just take it easy on the speed. These donut spares aren't meant for the long haul." "I can't thank you enough," John said, helping Pete gather his tools. "You saved me hours out here." Pete waved it off. It's nothing. Pay it forward someday." John nodded thoughtfully. "I definitely will." He glanced down the highway toward Barstow. "Can I buy you a coffee or something to eat? There's that diner at the next exit. Mike's Road Stop, I think it's called." Pete checked his watch. He was running ahead of schedule, and the thought of Mike's famous apple pie made his stomach growl. "You know what? I could use a break. I'll follow you there." Back in his truck, Pete watched as the Porsche with its donut spare carefully merged onto the highway. There was something about John that Pete couldn't quite place, a kind of quiet intensity beneath the calm exterior. In his years on the road, Pete had developed a decent sense for reading people, and this guy seemed solid. 20 minutes later, they pulled into the gravel parking lot of Mike's Road Stop, a small diner that had been serving truckers and travelers for decades. Pete had been stopping here since his first solo run 15 years ago. The place wasn't much to look at from the outside, just a long, low building with a neon sign and a row of windows. But they made the best pie in 3 states. As they approached the entrance, Pete noticed John pull a pair of sunglasses from his pocket and slip them on, despite the fact they were about to head indoors. A baseball cap appeared from somewhere as well, pulled low over his eyes. "Sun gets pretty fierce out here," John said by way of explanation, holding the door open. The cool air conditioning was a welcome relief after the desert heat. The diner was about half full, a typical mid-afternoon crowd of truckers, locals, and a few tourists passing through. Cheryl, the waitress who'd been working at Mike's for as long as Pete could remember, waved them toward a booth by the window. "Pete." "Anderson, didn't expect to see you till Thursday," she called out, grabbing menus. "Got lucky with the schedule this week," Pete replied with a smile, sliding into the booth. John took the seat opposite, his back to the rest of the diner. As Cheryl approached with their menus, Pete noticed her do a double take at John. Her eyes widened slightly, and she almost stumbled before catching herself. "What can I get you boys? To drink?" she asked, her voice a touch higher than normal. "Coffee, black," Pete said. "The same, please," John added quietly. As Cheryl walked away, Pete noticed she whispered something to one of the other waitresses, who immediately turned to stare at their booth. A strange feeling began to form in the pit of Pete's stomach. "You come here often?" John asked, seemingly oblivious to the growing whispers. "Yeah, been stopping at Mike's since I started this route," Pete replied, watching as the cook poked his head out from the kitchen to look their way. "Best apple pie you'll ever taste." John smiled. "I'll have to try it then." When Cheryl returned with their coffees, she was beaming with barely contained excitement. She set down the mugs with shaking hands. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said, addressing John directly. "But are you who I think you are?" John's smile remained in place, but Pete noticed it tighten just slightly around the edges. "Depends on who you think I am," he replied gently. And that's when it hit Pete like a ton of bricks. The familiar face he couldn't quite place, the Porsche, the sunglasses and hat. The way everyone in the diner was now stealing glances at their booth. He hadn't just helped some random guy change a tire on the side of the road. He'd helped Keanu Reeves. Pete sat frozen, coffee mug halfway to his lips, as the realization washed over him. The man sitting across from him, the guy whose tire he'd just changed on the side of the highway, was Keanu Reeves. The star of The Matrix, Speed, John Wick, and countless other movies Pete had watched over the years. Cheryl, the waitress, was still standing there, practically vibrating with excitement. "I loved you and Well, everything, she gushed. My grandson and I just watched all the Bill and Ted movies last month. Would you mind? She pulled out her order pad and a pen. Could I get an autograph? Keanu, not John as he'd introduced himself, smiled warmly. Of course, he said, taking the pad. What's your grandson's name? Tyler, Cheryl beamed. He's 14 and thinks you're the coolest. As Keanu signed the paper, Pete noticed other diners starting to whisper and point. A couple pulled out their phones, angling them toward their booth. Pete felt suddenly out of place, like he'd accidentally walked onto a movie set. Pete stammered, setting down his coffee. I had no idea. Keanu handed the autograph back to Cheryl with a genuine, thank you for watching my films, then turned his attention back to Pete. I know, he said simply. That's what made it nice. The way he said it, with no pretense, just honest appreciation, made Pete relax a little. This wasn't how he'd imagined movie stars behaved. Cheryl took their food orders, apple pie for Pete, and a club sandwich with fries for Keanu, before reluctantly returning to her other tables. By now, word had spread throughout the diner. A young couple at the counter kept stealing glances. An older trucker Pete recognized from the road gave him a bewildered thumbs up. Sorry about this, Keanu said, nodding subtly toward the attention they were getting. It comes with the territory. No, I'm sorry, Pete replied. If I'd recognized you, I wouldn't have suggested coming in here. Keanu shook his head. I'm glad you did. This place has character. He looked around appreciatively at the vintage road signs decorating the walls, the worn vinyl booths, the specials written in chalk behind the counter. Besides, you said they have the best apple pie in 3 states. That's not something I can pass up. Pete couldn't help but laugh. Here he was having coffee with one of the biggest movie stars in the world, and the guy seemed genuinely excited about trying the pie at a highway diner. So, Pete said, trying to act normal, you said you were working in Vegas? Just wrapped a few scenes for a new film. Keanu nodded. Nothing too exciting, mostly second unit stuff in the desert. The director wanted authentic landscapes. And you drive yourself? No fancy limo or anything? Keanu smiled. Whenever I can. I prefer it, actually. Gives me time to think. He took a sip of his coffee. This is good coffee. Pete was struck by how ordinary their conversation felt, despite the extraordinary circumstances. The initial shock was wearing off, replaced by curiosity about the man behind the famous name. I've got to ask, Pete said, lowering his voice. Why did you tell me your name was John? A slight sheepish expression crossed Keanu's face. Force of habit, I guess. John's my middle name. When I meet new people and I'm not working, sometimes it's easier to be John for a while. He shrugged. People treat you differently when they know. Pete glanced around the diner, where nearly everyone was trying not to stare at their booth. Yeah, I can see that. Their food arrived. Cheryl had apparently called in reinforcements as the owner of the diner himself delivered their plates. Mike was a burly man in his 60s who'd been running the place since before Pete started. Driving. On the house today, Mike announced, setting down the plates. It's an honor to have you here, Mr. Reeves. Please call me Keanu, he replied. And that's very kind but unnecessary. Pete here saved me from a long wait in the desert sun. He's the one deserving the free meal. Mike looked surprised, then pleased. Well then, both of you eat on the house today. Pete's one of our regulars. Keeps half the hospitals in Southern California stocked up. He clapped Pete on the shoulder. Never mentioned he was friends with movie stars, though. Just met today, Pete explained. Flat tire on the 15. Good man. Mike nodded approvingly. Enjoy your meal, gentlemen. The pie's fresh this morning. As Mike walked away, Keanu picked up a French fry. Hospitals, huh? You mentioned that earlier. What exactly do you haul? Pete cut into his apple pie, the cinnamon-scented steam rising from the flaky crust. Bit of everything, medications, equipment, supplies. My company has contracts with about a dozen hospitals in the region. He took a bite of pie and closed his eyes briefly. Man, that's good. Keanu tried his sandwich and nodded appreciatively. This is excellent. Told you, Pete grinned. Mike's wife makes everything from scratch. For a few minutes, they ate in comfortable silence. Pete was still trying to wrap his head around the situation. Just an hour ago, he was making his regular run. Now he was having pie with Keanu Reeves while half the diner snuck photos. So what's it like? Pete finally asked. Being, you? Keanu considered the question, taking it seriously. It's complicated. Grateful for the opportunities. The work itself, the acting, telling stories, that's the part I love. The rest? He gestured vaguely toward the attention they were receiving. That's just noise, some days louder than others. Must be hard to just be a normal person, Pete observed. That's why I value moments like changing a tire on the side of the road, Keanu said. Or riding my motorcycle through small towns where nobody recognizes me. Those are the times when the world feels real. Something about the way he said it resonated with Pete. Despite their vastly different lives, there was a shared appreciation for simple, genuine moments. Your daughter, Keanu said, changing the subject. The softball pitcher. You've got a game tonight? Pete was surprised he remembered. Yeah, if I make it back in time. They play at 6. What's her name? Lisa, Pete said, unable to keep the pride from his voice. She's got a better arm than I ever did. You must be proud, Keanu said. Every day, Pete nodded. Even when she's driving me crazy. He chuckled. She's at that age where dad's not cool anymore, But softball, that's where we still connect. That's important, Keanu said, with a thoughtfulness that suggested he wasn't just making conversation. Those connections, they're what matters. A comfortable silence fell between them as they finished their food. Pete noticed that some of the initial excitement in the diner had settled down. A few people had approached for autographs, which Keanu gave graciously, but most were now giving them space. I've been meaning to ask, Pete said. What happened to your security? Don't you guys usually have, bodyguards or something? Keanu laughed softly. Not usually, no. For premieres and events, sure. But day to day? He shook his head. I try to keep things simple. Huh, Pete said, reconsidering some of his assumptions about celebrity life. Learn something new every day. As they finished their meal, Pete glanced at his watch. If he left now, he could still make his delivery on time and possibly make it to Lisa's game. He was about to mention this when Keanu spoke up. I have an idea, he said, setting down his napkin. You're heading to Riverside after your delivery, right? For your daughter's game? That's the plan. Pete nodded. If traffic cooperates. What if I came with you for the delivery? I could help unload, make things go faster. Keanu leaned forward, his expression earnest. It's the least I can do after you helped me. Pete blinked in surprise. You want to help unload medical supplies? Why not? Keanu shrugged. I've got nowhere to be until tomorrow. And it sounds more interesting than sitting in traffic alone. Pete tried to imagine pulling up to St. Mary's Hospital with Keanu Reeves riding shotgun in his truck. The thought was so absurd he almost laughed. You're serious, he realized. Completely. Keanu nodded. Unless it's a problem? No, it's just... Pete shook his head, smiling. My dispatcher would never believe it. Neither would Lisa. So is that a yes? Pete looked at the Hollywood star sitting across from him, a guy who, despite all his fame and success, seemed genuinely interested in helping a truck driver finish his workday faster so he could make his daughter's softball game. You know what, sure, Pete said, making a decision he never could have anticipated when he woke up that morning. But I should warn you, unloading hospital supplies isn't exactly glamorous work. Keanu smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. Sometimes the least glamorous work is the most satisfying, especially when it matters. As they stood to leave, Pete couldn't help wondering what he was getting himself into. But something told him this unexpected detour in his routine day was about to become even more interesting. The parking lot of Mike's road stop had gathered a small crowd by the time Pete and Keanu stepped outside. Word had spread through the diner and several travelers lingered near their vehicles, phones ready. Pete felt a sudden protective instinct walking slightly ahead to clear a path. Is it always like this? Pete asked over his shoulder. More or less, Keanu replied with remarkable calm. Some days are worse than others. A teenage boy approached, eyes wide with disbelief. Mr. Reeves, could I get a quick picture? My friends will never believe this. Keanu nodded. Sure thing. He posed briefly with the boy while his mother snapped a photo. Thank you so much, the mom gushed. We loved you and always be my maybe. That slow-motion restaurant entrance was hilarious. Glad you enjoyed it, Keanu said with a genuine smile. The director had a great vision for that scene. Pete watched as Keanu handled the attention with patience and grace. There was no annoyance, no celebrity attitude, just a guy being kind. To fans. After a few more photos and autographs, they finally made it to Pete's truck. Sorry about that, Keanu said as they climbed into the cab. Don't apologize, Pete replied, starting the engine. I'm just impressed by how you handle it. If that were me, I think I'd go crazy. Keanu settled into the passenger seat, looking surprisingly at home in the truck's cabin. You get used to it. And it helps to remember that every person has their own story. They're not just fans. They're people whose lives connected with something I was part of. The philosophical take caught Pete off guard. As he guided the massive rig back onto the highway, he glanced at his unexpected passenger. Never thought of it that way. So, Keanu said, changing the subject as he looked around the cab with interest. This is your office. Pete chuckled. Home away from home. 15 years in this seat, though not this exact truck. The company upgrades every few years. It's comfortable, Keanu observed. More spacious than I expected. Modern rigs are like apartments on wheels, Pete said, patting the dashboard affectionately. I've got a mini fridge behind the seat, power inverter for my coffee maker, even a small microwave. And you deliver to St. Mary's Hospital in San Bernardino? That's today's final stop, Pete nodded. Usually takes about 40 minutes to unload everything and get the paperwork signed. That's if Randy's on receiving, he's efficient. If it's Dave, could be an hour. Keanu looked out at the desert landscape rolling by. What kind of supplies are we delivering? Everything from bandages to specialized equipment, Pete explained, settling into the familiar rhythm of the road. Today's mostly pharmacy supplies and some new monitoring equipment for the NICU. That's the Neonatal Intensive Care Unit, Keanu finished. For premature babies. Pete raised his eyebrows. You know your hospital terminology. Research. For a role once, Keanu explained. Played a doctor. Spent 2 weeks shadowing physicians at UCLA Medical Center. No kidding? Which movie was that? It never got made, Keanu said with a small shrug. Sometimes that happens. But the research was fascinating. For the next 20 miles, they fell into easy conversation. Pete was surprised by how knowledgeable Keanu was about a wide range of topics, from motorcycles to architecture to classical literature. But what struck him most was how attentively the actor listened. When Pete talked about the challenges of raising a 12-year-old daughter, as a single dad, Keanu asked thoughtful questions without prying. Lisa's mom moved to Phoenix with her new husband 4 years ago, Pete explained, changing lanes to pass a slow-moving RV. She sees Lisa during school breaks and some weekends, but day-to-day it's just me and the kid. That can't be easy with your schedule, Keanu observed. It's not, Pete admitted. My sister helps out when I'm on the road, but I've been trying to get more local routes to be home nights. He tapped the steering wheel thoughtfully. The company's been pretty good about it, all things considered. What does Lisa think about your job? Pete smiled. She used to think it was the coolest thing ever. When she was little, she'd tell everyone her dad drove a dragon truck. He laughed at the memory. Now she's more interested in whether I can make her games and help with science projects. Keanu nodded, looking out at the highway stretching before them. The things that matter change as we grow up, but being there, that always matters. There was something in his tone that made Pete wonder about Keanu's own life. The tabloids, and entertainment shows painted celebrities as living charmed, perfect lives. But the man sitting in his passenger seat seemed to understand struggle and responsibility as well as anyone. As they approached San Bernardino, the landscape changed from desert to suburbs. Traffic thickened, and Pete expertly navigated the big rig through increasingly busy streets. "So what's next for you?" Pete asked. "After this film wraps?" "Taking some time off, actually," Keanu replied. "Been going nonstop for a couple years, thinking about a motorcycle trip up the Pacific Coast Highway." "Alone?" "Yeah," Keanu nodded. "Some of my best thinking happens on a bike with the ocean on one side and mountains on the other." Pete could understand that. His truck routes often took him through some of America's most beautiful landscapes, and even after 15 years, certain stretches of highway still filled him with a sense of peace and perspective. The GPS announced their exit was approaching, and Pete guided the truck down the ramp towards St. Mary's Hospital. The massive medical complex came into view, a sprawling collection of buildings serving much of San Bernardino County. "Delivery entrance is around back," Pete explained, following the familiar route to the loading docks. "Fair warning, the staff might freak out a little when they see you," Keanu smiled. "I'll try to be helpful and stay out of the way." As Pete backed the truck up to the loading dock with practiced precision, he couldn't help thinking how surreal this day had become. Just hours ago he was making his routine run, and now he was about to unload medical supplies with Keanu Reeves. The receiving clerk stepped out as Pete cut the engine. It was Randy, thankfully, the more efficient of the regular staff. His eyes nearly popped out of his head when Keanu stepped down from the passenger side. "Holy, are you?" Randy stammered. "Just helping Pete with the delivery," Keanu said casually, extending his hand. "I'm Keanu." Randy looked like he might faint. Wow. Okay, let me get the paperwork." He scurried back inside, and Pete couldn't help laughing. "Told you." "Let's get to work," Keanu said, rolling up his sleeves. "Where do we start?" For the next 30 minutes, they worked side by side unloading boxes and wheeling pallets into the hospital's receiving area. Keanu followed Pete's instructions without hesitation, handling medical supplies with care and checking inventory lists. Against the delivery, the receiving staff kept stealing glances, but Keanu's down-to-earth attitude eventually put them at ease. Dr. Chen, the head of pediatrics, happened to be passing through when she spotted Keanu helping to unload equipment for her department. "Mr. Reeves?" she asked in disbelief. "What are you doing here?" "Helping Pete make his delivery," Keanu replied simply, as if it were the most normal thing in the world for a Hollywood star to be moving boxes in a hospital loading dock. "This is equipment for our NICU," Dr. Chen said, examining the labels. "New monitoring systems we've been waiting on for months." "Pete mentioned they were important," Keanu said. "Glad we could get them here safely." Dr. Chen looked between Pete and Keanu, clearly trying to piece together this unlikely partnership. "Well, this is unexpected. Thank you both." As they continued working, word spread through the hospital. By the time they were finishing up, several nurses, doctors, and staff members had found reasons to visit the receiving area. Keanu took it all in stride, pausing for quick photos when asked, but otherwise focusing on completing the delivery. "That's the last of it," Pete announced, checking off the final items on his clipboard. "Just need Randy's signature and we're done." Randy, who had been watching the scene unfold with continued amazement, quickly signed the paperwork. "This is the craziest delivery day ever," he said, shaking his head. As they prepared to leave, Dr. Chen returned with another doctor, a tall woman with kind eyes who introduced herself as the hospital's chief of medicine. "Mr. Reeves, Mr. Anderson," she addressed them both formally. "I wanted to personally thank you for this delivery. The equipment you brought today will help us monitor our most vulnerable patients more effectively." "I'm just the driver," Pete said modestly. "Been delivering to St. Mary's for years, and we appreciate that more than you know," she replied earnestly. "Our work depends on reliable people like you." She turned to Keanu. "And Mr. Reeves, I have to ask, what brought you to our hospital today?" Keanu glanced at Pete before answering. Just paying forward a kindness. Pete helped me when my car broke down and I wanted to help him get to his daughter's softball game on time. The chief of medicine smiled. Well, if you ever want to visit our pediatric ward, the children would be thrilled. Many of them are huge fans. Something flickered across Keanu's face. Interest, perhaps, or recognition of an opportunity to do something meaningful. I'd like that, he said sincerely. Maybe we could arrange something for the future. With final handshakes and thank yous, Pete and Keanu made their way back to the truck. It was just past 4:30. If traffic wasn't too bad, Pete might actually make it to Lisa's game with time to spare. That was... Pete searched for the right word as they climbed back into the cab. Satisfying, Keanu finished for him, knowing that equipment will help babies who need it most. Pete nodded, starting the engine. Yeah, exactly. He looked at his passenger with new appreciation. You know, you're nothing like I would have expected. Is that good or bad? Keanu asked with a slight smile. Definitely good, Pete assured him. Now let's see if we can get you to Riverside in time to see a 12-year-old softball phenom in action. As the truck pulled away from St. Mary's Hospital, Pete couldn't help thinking that this story, the day he changed Keanu Reeves's tire and then delivered hospital supplies with him, was one no one would ever believe. Except that it was actually happening. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the highway as Pete guided his truck toward Riverside. Traffic was surprisingly light for a weekday, which Pete took as a good sign. Maybe his luck was finally turning around. If we keep moving like this, we should make it with about 20 minutes to spare, Pete said, checking the dashboard clock. Keanu nodded, looking more relaxed than he had all day. Plenty of time? Is the field far from where you live? Just a few miles, Pete replied. The school's on the other side of town from my place. Lisa stays with my sister Diane after school on days I'm on the road. She'll be surprised to see you, Keanu observed. Pete smiled. Yeah, I wasn't supposed to be back until tomorrow, but the schedule shifted, and then meeting you somehow sped everything up. Meeting me is what caused the delay in the first place, Keanu pointed out with a wry smile. Flat tire, remember? True, Pete laughed, but we made up for it. Randy usually takes twice as long to process a delivery. Pretty sure your presence motivated him to work at record speed. They fell into comfortable silence for a few minutes, the only sounds the steady hum of the engine and the occasional call coming through on the CB radio. Pete had almost forgotten he was driving with a movie star until his phone rang through the truck's Bluetooth system. The display showed Diane's cell. Mind if I get this? It's my sister, Pete asked. Of course, Keanu replied. Pete pressed the answer button on his steering wheel. Hey, Di. Pete. His sister's voice filled the cab. Where are you? Lisa's been asking if you'll make it to her game. On my way now, Pete said, unable to keep the excitement from his voice. Should be there by 5:30 if traffic holds. That's great. She's going to be thrilled. She's been practicing her fastball. All week wanted to make sure you saw it. Pete smiled. Wouldn't miss it. Hey, is it okay if I bring someone with me? There was a pause on the other end. Someone? Like a date? Pete glanced at Keanu, who was politely pretending to be interested in the passing scenery. No, not a date. Just a friend I met on the road today. You'll see when we get there. Oh, mysterious, Diane teased. Now I'm intrigued. Trust me, so was I, Pete replied cryptically. See you soon, okay? We're about 30 minutes out. All right. Drive safe. Lisa's already at the field with the team for warm-ups. I'm heading over in a few. Thanks, Di. See you soon. Pete ended the call and shot an apologetic look at Keanu. Sisters, you know? I do, actually, Keanu replied. I have two. No kidding? Older or younger? Both younger, Keanu said with obvious affection. They keep me grounded. Always have. Pete nodded in understanding. Diane's been a lifesaver since Lisa's mom moved away. Don't know what I'd do without her. As they approached Riverside, Pete took an exit that led them away from the main highways and into residential areas. The truck seemed oversized on the suburban streets, but Pete navigated with the confidence of someone who'd made this drive countless times. Need to drop the rig at the yard before we head to the game, Pete explained, turning onto an industrial street lined with warehouses and truck lots. Company policy, can't take it home unless I'm heading out first thing in the morning. Makes sense, Keanu said, looking at the rows of similar trucks parked in a fenced lot ahead. Pete pulled up to a security gate and waved to the guard, who did a comical double-take upon seeing Keanu in the passenger seat. Pete rolled down his window. "Evening, Hank." "Pete." The guard nodded, eyes still fixed on Keanu. "You, got a passenger today?" "Just giving a friend a ride," Pete said casually. "Need to drop the rig and grab my pickup. Lisa's got a game tonight." Hank seemed at a loss for words, but managed to hit the button to open the gate. As they pulled through, Pete could see the guard already on his phone, undoubtedly telling someone about who he'd just seen. "News travels fast," Keanu observed. "You have no idea," Pete laughed. "By tomorrow, the whole company will be talking about this." Pete backed the big rig into its designated spot with practiced ease. After completing a quick post-trip inspection and filling out his logbook, he grabbed his duffel bag from behind the seat. "My truck's just over there," he said, pointing to a well-maintained blue Ford pickup parked near the office building. "Not quite as roomy as this, but it gets the job done." As they walked across the lot, several drivers and yard workers stopped what they were doing to stare. Pete gave casual waves but kept moving, trying to minimize the disruption for Keanu's sake. "Do you get recognized everywhere you go?" Pete asked as they reached his pickup. "Pretty much," Keanu admitted as they climbed in. "Some places more than others. Big cities, it's constant. Small towns, sometimes I can fly under the radar for a bit." "Must be exhausting," Pete remarked, starting the engine. "You learn to live with it," Keanu said simply. "It's part of the job." The drive to the softball field took less than 15 minutes. As they pulled into the school parking lot, Pete could see the teams already on the field warming up, parents and siblings filled the small bleachers along the first and third base lines. A concession stand staffed by volunteers was doing brisk business selling hot dogs and popcorn. "Normal American scene," Keanu observed with what seemed like genuine appreciation. "This is nice." Pete parked and turned to his unexpected companion. "Look, I should probably warn you. This is going to cause a stir. Small town, school event, word's going to spread fast that you're here." Keanu nodded thoughtfully. "I understand. If you'd rather I wait in the truck?" "No. That's not what I meant," Pete interrupted. "You came all this way. I just want to make sure you're prepared. And maybe, could we keep the focus on the kids? It's their game, after all." Keanu's face brightened with understanding. "Absolutely. I'm just here to watch Lisa pitch. I'm not Keanu Reeves tonight. I'm just your friend John, okay?" Pete felt a wave of gratitude. "Thanks, that means a lot." They got out of the truck and made their way toward the field. Pete scanned the dugout until he spotted Lisa in her yellow and blue uniform, throwing practice pitches to the catcher. Even from a distance, he could see the determination on her face, the focused expression she always wore before games. "That's her," Pete said proudly, pointing her out. "Number 17. "Good form," Keanu observed, watching Lisa's pitching motion. "She's got a natural wind-up." Before Pete could respond, he heard his sister's voice calling his name. Diane was waving from the bleachers along the first baseline, saving them seats with her purse and a small cooler. As they made their way over, Pete watched his sister's expression change from welcoming to complete shock as she recognized who was walking beside him. "Pete?" she mouthed silently, eyes wide with disbelief. "Hey, Di," Pete said casually as they reached the bleachers. "This is my friend John. He helped me finish up early so I could make it to the game." "John," Diane repeated weakly, clearly recognizing Keanu despite the introduction. "It's very nice to meet you." "Pleasure's mine," Keanu replied warmly, shaking her hand. "Pete's told me a lot about Lisa's pitching skills. Looking forward to seeing her play." Diane seemed to recover slightly from her shock. "Well, you're in for a treat. She's the best pitcher in the league." They settled into their seats as parents around them began to notice who had joined the crowd. Whispers spread quickly, and phones began to appear, though most people maintained a respectful distance. The coach blew his whistle and the teams gathered in their respective dugouts. Pete saw the moment Lisa spotted him in the stands. Her whole face lit up and she waved excitedly. Then her expression shifted to confusion as she noticed the man sitting beside her father. "She's trying to figure out if that's really you," Pete said to Keanu with a chuckle. "Let's focus on her game," Keanu suggested. "This is her moment." The announcement came over the loudspeaker that the game was about to begin, and the crowd settled down. The visiting team took the field first, with Lisa's team batting. As the game progressed, Pete was pleasantly surprised by Keanu's genuine interest. He cheered at appropriate moments, asked knowledgeable questions about the rules, and seemed genuinely invested in the outcome. By the third inning, when Lisa took the mound to pitch, some of the initial excitement about his presence had even died down, with parents refocusing on their children's performance. "She looks nervous," Pete observed as Lisa took a deep breath on the mound. "First time pitching with her dad watching in a while?" Keanu asked. "Yeah," Pete nodded. "Usually I'm on the road for weekday games." Lisa's first pitch was a ball, wide, by several inches. The second wasn't much better. "She's overthinking it," Diane said worriedly. Pete stood up and called out, "You've got this, Lisa, just like practice." Lisa glanced over, took another deep breath, and reset her stance. Her next pitch was a perfect strike right down the middle. The batter swung and missed. "That's it," Pete cheered. Lisa seemed to find her rhythm after that. Her next two pitches were equally impressive, striking out the batter. As the teams switched positions for the next at-bat, Lisa jogged past their section of the bleachers. "Dad, you made it," she called out, her face flushed with excitement. "Wouldn't miss it, kiddo," Pete replied proudly. Lisa's eyes darted to Keanu, then back to her father, a clear, "Is that who I think it is?" expression on her face. Pete just winked at her. "Focus on the game. We'll talk after." As Lisa returned to the dugout, Pete noticed her excitedly whispering to her teammates, all of whom immediately turned to stare in their direction. "I think your cover's blown," Pete said to Keanu. "It was inevitable," Keanu replied good-naturedly. "But they're still focused on the game, which is what matters." The rest of the game was a showcase of Lisa's pitching talent. Perhaps motivated by her special audience, she pitched better than Pete had ever seen, striking out batter after batter. By the final inning, her team was ahead 5-2, largely thanks to her performance on the mound. As the last out was called and Lisa's team erupted in cheers, Pete felt a swell of pride that almost brought tears to his eyes. "She's amazing," he said, clapping enthusiastically. "She really is," Keanu agreed, standing to applaud alongside the other parents. "You've got a lot to be proud of." The teams lined up to shake hands, the traditional show of sportsmanship. As they dispersed, Lisa broke from her teammates and ran toward the bleachers, her eyes shining with excitement. "Dad," she called out, nearly tackling Pete with a hug despite being sweaty and dirt-stained from the game. "Did you see those curveballs? Coach said they were perfect." "I saw," Pete laughed, hugging her back. "You were incredible out there." Lisa pulled back, her eyes darting to Keanu, who was standing a respectful distance away. "Dad," she whispered, though not quietly enough. "Is that really him?" Pete looked at Keanu, who stepped forward with a warm smile. "Your dad's told me you're quite the pitcher," he said, extending his hand. He wasn't exaggerating. That was impressive. Lisa stared at his outstretched hand for a moment before shaking it, seemingly at a loss for words, a rare occurrence for his chatty daughter. Why are you here?" she finally managed. Pete put his arm around Lisa's shoulders. "It's kind of a long story. One I think we should save for after you celebrate with your team." Lisa's coach was calling the players for a post-game huddle, but she seemed reluctant to leave. "Go on," Pete encouraged. "We'll be right here." As Lisa jogged back to her team, stealing glances over her shoulder, Diane leaned toward Pete. You have some serious explaining to do, she whispered. And you'd better make it good, because this is the craziest thing that's ever happened at a middle school softball game in Riverside. Pete looked at Keanu, who was watching the team huddle with a genuine smile. Trust me, Pete said. It's a story no one would believe if it hadn't actually happened. The local pizza place was buzzing with activity as softball players and their families celebrated the win. Pete had suggested they go somewhere quieter, but Lisa had insisted this was where the team always went after games. Keanu, to his credit, didn't seem to mind the noise or the not-so-subtle stares and whispers from other patrons. They'd managed to snag a corner booth. Pete, Lisa, Diane, and Keanu, somewhat shielded from the rest of the restaurant. Lisa had barely touched her pizza, too busy peppering Keanu with questions about movies, stunts, and what it was like to be famous. So in that scene where you're running across the rooftops in John Wick, was that really you, or a stunt double? Lisa asked, leaning forward eagerly. A bit of both, Keanu admitted. I do as many of my own stunts as they'll let me, but the insurance companies have rules about certain things. That makes sense, Lisa nodded seriously. Safety first. Pete watched the interaction with amazement. His shy, sometimes awkward daughter was chatting with Keanu Reeves as if they were old friends. The initial shock had worn off, replaced by genuine curiosity and excitement. Lisa, Diane interjected gently, maybe give Keanu a chance to eat his pizza before it gets cold. Oh, sorry, Lisa said, looking embarrassed. No need to apologize, Keanu smiled. Your questions are thoughtful, much better than most interviews. I do. Lisa beamed at the compliment. Dad says I ask too many questions. I said you ask tough questions, Pete corrected. Like that time you grilled me for 30 minutes about why the sky is blue and wouldn't accept because it just is as an answer. Everyone laughed, and for a moment it felt like any normal family dinner. If you ignored the fact that other diners kept finding excuses to walk past their table for a glimpse of the Hollywood star in their midst. I still can't believe you. Guys met because of a flat tire, Diane said, shaking her head. What are the odds? The universe works in mysterious ways, Keanu replied. That's what my science teacher says, Lisa chimed in. Mr. Wilson talks about cosmic coincidences all the time. Smart teacher, Keanu nodded. He's going to freak out when I tell him about this, Lisa said, then paused. Wait, can I tell people about this, or is it supposed to be a secret? Pete and Keanu exchanged glances. It's not a secret, Pete said carefully, but maybe we don't need to make a huge deal out of it, right? Your dad's being considerate, Keanu explained. Sometimes when people find out I've been somewhere, it creates a lot of excitement. Like those ladies who keep pretending to go to the bathroom just to walk by our table? Lisa asked bluntly. Diane nearly choked on her soda while Pete tried not to laugh. Keanu just smiled. Exactly like that. A comfortable silence fell as they continued eating. Pete found himself reflecting on the incredible turn his day had taken. What had started as a routine delivery run had transformed into one of the most memorable days of his life. And not just because he'd met a famous actor, but because of the genuine connection that had formed so unexpectedly. So, Keanu said, breaking the silence, I've been thinking about what the hospital administrator said earlier, about visiting the pediatric ward sometime. Pete looked up from his pizza. Yeah? I do that occasionally. Visit children's hospitals, I mean. Usually without publicity. Keanu seemed almost shy about admitting this. It's something that matters to me. That's really cool, Lisa said earnestly. I was thinking, Keanu continued, that maybe St. Mary's could use some additional support. Not just a visit, but something more substantial. Pete leaned forward, intrigued. What kind of support? I've worked with a few foundations that provide funding for medical equipment, especially for NICUs and pediatric departments, Keanu explained. After seeing those new monitoring systems we delivered today, I made a few calls. You did? Pete was surprised. He hadn't noticed Keanu making any calls. While you were finishing the paperwork, Keanu nodded. The foundation I work with has been looking for their next project. I think St. Mary's might be a good fit. That would be amazing, Diane said. St. Mary's serves so many families in the region. The thing is, Keanu continued, looking directly at Pete, they'd need someone local who understands the hospital's needs, someone who knows the staff, the system, the supply chain. Pete suddenly realized where this was going. Wait, you mean me? You've been delivering there for years, Keanu pointed out. You know more about what goes in and out of that hospital than almost anyone, and the staff clearly respects you. I'm just the delivery guy, Pete said, but even as the words left his mouth, he knew that wasn't entirely true. Over the years, he'd become familiar with every department in the hospital, knew many of the staff by name, understood their challenges and needs. You're much more than that, Keanu said firmly. You're a vital link in their care system. The foundation would need someone like you to help coordinate, make sure the right equipment gets to the right places. Lisa was watching her father, with wide eyes. Dad, that sounds important. It would be a consulting role, Keanu explained. Something you could do alongside your regular routes. The foundation would compensate you for your time, of course. Pete sat back, genuinely stunned. I don't know what to say. Say yes, Lisa urged. You're always talking about wanting to make more of a difference. She's right, Diane added. You've been saying for years that you want work that keeps you closer to home. Pete looked at his daughter and sister, then back to Keanu. This is unexpected. The best opportunities usually are, Keanu said with a small smile. Just like stopping to help someone with a flat tire. Before Pete could respond, the restaurant's owner approached their table, looking slightly apologetic for the interruption. I'm sorry to bother you folks, he said, addressing Keanu. But my son is a huge fan of your movies. He's working in the kitchen tonight. Would it be too much trouble to say a quick hello? I understand completely if you'd rather not. Keanu didn't hesitate. Not at all. Lead the way. As Keanu followed the owner toward the kitchen, Pete turned to his sister and daughter. Is this really happening? Or did I fall asleep at the wheel somewhere outside Barstow? It's happening, Diane confirmed, looking just as amazed. Pete, this could be an incredible opportunity for you. For the hospital too, Lisa added thoughtfully. Think about all those babies in the NICU. They need good equipment. Pete felt a swell of pride at his daughter's compassion. When did you get so grown up? He asked, ruffling her hair affectionately. Lisa ducked away, pretending to be annoyed, but clearly pleased. Dad, stop, I'm not a little kid anymore. You'll always be my little kid, Pete said, even when you're pitching in the Olympics. Diane leaned closer to Pete. Seriously though, what do you think about Keanu's offer? Pete considered the question. It sounds amazing, but also, I don't know, it seems too good to be true. Things like this don't just happen to regular guys like me. Maybe they should happen more often, Diane suggested. Maybe that's the whole point. Before Pete could respond, Keanu returned to the table, followed by a beaming young man in a cook's apron who couldn't stop thanking him. As they finished their meal, the conversation turned to logistics, exchanging contact information, discussing next steps for the foundation proposal, making plans for a follow-up meeting at St. Mary's. What had started as a random encounter was transforming into something meaningful and lasting. When it was finally time to leave, they stood in the parking lot beside Pete's truck. The evening air had cooled and stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. I called a car service, Keanu explained. They'll take me back to where my Porsche is being repaired. I could drive you, Pete offered. It's the least I could do after everything. Keanu shook his head. You've done more than enough. Besides, you should get Lisa home. It's a school night. It's worth staying up late to meet you, Lisa said earnestly. The pleasure was all mine, Keanu replied, shaking her hand formally, which made her giggle. That was some excellent pitching today. Thanks, Lisa beamed. Maybe you could come to another game sometime? Lisa, Pete cautioned, not wanting her to impose. I'd like that, Keanu said, surprising them all. Next time I'm in the area, I'll check your schedule. A sleek black car pulled into the parking lot. Keanu's ride had arrived. "Well," Pete said, suddenly finding it difficult to say goodbye. "This has been— I don't even have words for what this day has been." "Extraordinary," Keanu suggested. "That works," Pete nodded. "Thank you. Not just for the foundation thing, but for being so normal. Real." "I should be thanking you," Keanu replied, "for the tire change, the conversation, for including me in your family's evening. It meant a lot." The two men shook hands, but Keanu pulled Pete into a brief hug instead. "I'll be in touch about the foundation," Keanu promised. "And Pete, what you do? Delivering those supplies day after day, making sure hospitals have what they need to save lives. That matters. Don't ever think you're just the delivery guy." With that, Keanu said his goodbyes to Diane and Lisa, then climbed into the waiting car. As it pulled away, Lisa turned to her father with eyes full of wonder. "Dad, that was the coolest thing ever!" Pete laughed, putting his arm around his daughter's shoulders as they walked to his truck. "Yeah, it really was." "And you're going to help with his foundation?" Lisa asked. "I think I might." Pete nodded, the idea feeling more real now. "What do you think about that?" "I think it's awesome," Lisa said decisively. "And I think you deserve it." As they drove home through the quiet streets of Riverside, Pete thought about the extraordinary chain of events that had led to this moment. A flat tire on a desert highway, a simple decision to stop and help a stranger. And somehow that simple act of kindness had opened doors he never could have imagined. Tomorrow, he'd go back to his regular route. He'd deliver supplies to hospitals and clinics across Southern California, just as he'd done for 15 years. But something had shifted. The work felt different now, more meaningful, more connected to the lives it impacted. "Hey, Dad?" Lisa's voice broke into his thoughts. "Yeah, kiddo. Today was a really good day, wasn't it?" Pete smiled, glancing at his daughter in the passenger seat. "Yeah, one of the best. Sometimes, life's most extraordinary moments begin with the simplest acts of kindness." For Pete Anderson, changing a tire on a desert highway had changed everything. Not because of who Keanu Reeves was, but because of who they both turned out to be. Just two people connecting as humans, making each other's lives a little better along the way. And in the end, isn't that what really matters?